I'm out here pretty early morning at our neighbor's field. This is where we grow all of our production garlic and a bunch of nursery stock. We're going to be growing this year a ½ acre of potatoes in this field here. We can go into greater detail in another video, but this morning I'm planning on using a scythe. It's a grass blade Austrian scythe to harvest a huge amount of grass to feed our chickens and also to use as a mulch. Our neighbor has a lot of area here. You can see we've mowed a bit in the past, and I'm going to mow into this area. I'd like to share notes that with a scythe, with a nicely tuned sharp scythe, you can harvest incredible amounts of material. So this is a scythe. This is the one that I'm using today. This happens to be made by One Scythe Revolution. I'll put a link to them in the description. There's also Scythe Supply up in Maine that I've ordered scythes from in the past and I've been very happy with. Please comment below if you found some scythes that you like, maybe from local sales, or there's some other vendors where they're nice and inexpensive, a good entryway. This is probably the best one I've ever met as far as strength and quality, and for grass harvesting, a nice long grass blade is pretty critical. And this is the tool that will allow me to harvest grass at a pretty remarkable clip. I'm going to sharpen the scythe before I use it, especially when I'm harvesting grass. It's really important to have a very sharp blade. I'll do a more detailed instructional video on this later, but you can also find some from the folks that make this particular scythe, the One Scythe Revolution video channel. Really good information. They really know what they're talking about. I could make a more detailed video about the style that I use, what I've learned over the years as far as a good effective stroke and how to think through the logistics of mowing and harvesting. But for now, I'm just going to harvest for about 1 minute and take a look at what that yield looks like if you happen to have a tool like this. I wasn't keeping really close track of time. I was also fiddling with the camera and trying to mow in a way that showed what I was doing. So it's kind of a distracted mowing, but less than a minute or so, and we've got all of this material, no gas needed. It's about a square bale worth of freshly cut, beautiful grass. For us, where we live, good quality square bales of dried hay cost around $4 a bale. So in about a minute, can harvest nice material like this to bring to animals. Some of this will go to our chickens. A lot of this will be used as a very deep mulch to feed, side dress our garlic. I'll spend about an hour mowing. It'll give me a huge amount of mulch and feed for our hens. The last 10 or so minutes I've been mowing inside the garden bed. There's a few beds here that are not in production that we'd like to transplant into corn and sunflower. And so rather than tilling it, we're just gonna cut down the plants that are growing in there. Maybe we'll leave the creeping Charlie as a ground cover where we find red clover, we can mow around them. But basically cutting and accumulating grass on top. And I nicked a pretty big stone when I was in there. And the grass blade is a miraculously sharp and accurate blade for cutting grasses, but it cannot handle a lot of intense interaction. So I'm gonna have to fix that. There are videos from that same One Scythe Revolution person on how to sand these out or file these out and then peen them back out. It's absolutely repairable and you can do it yourself, but it's a good reminder if you're mowing in mixed context or if you might be mowing lots of saplings or seedlings. So rather than, for example, this grassy context, it's more like very, very young honeysuckle and rose and brambles and old canes. Then you might look at a ditch blade instead of a grass blade. I spent about an hour both mowing and moving mulch, probably 20 minutes in total of mowing. And with the little nick on the blade, I don't want to push it too hard, so I'm going to go back and shave that out and then peen it and sharpen it up again so I don't damage the blade further. But you can see this is what got mowed. It's actually a fair amount and also not all that much. There's a huge amount more grass that could be harvested, and this is now in the garden. So all of our beds of cuttings here, these are black currants and elderberry varieties. In between, there are rows here and then garlic production. They've been weeded and mulched thoroughly in the walkways. The grass is a little too coarse to be putting right around the plants, but it's amazing as both a weed suppression for walkways, moisture retention, and fertilizer all in one. Once I clean up the blade, I'll come back tomorrow morning and maybe it's an hour a day or 2 hours a day for the next week or so. Just slowly chip away at mowing all the grasses that are around the space. It'll tidy things up immensely and also bring in all of this moisture, fertility, and weed suppression. A couple quick questions I'm anticipating in the comments, so I'd like to answer them here. One is, why not let it dry in the field? Why cut wet grass and move it? Personally, if it's a short commute, I'd like to move all that moisture into this garden as well. It'll help accelerate decomposition and keep things really active and alive. It's much healthier mulch if I'm not worried about mold or overheating, and at this level it's not going to be that much, so I like to move it while it's wet. The other question would be, I could imagine, what about all the grass seed? Valid question, but because we're doing a no-till system here, if I were to pull all these weeds and rip all the weeds of the walkways and leave it bare, I would absolutely get tons and tons of weeds, but I'd also have soil fertility loss and moisture loss. So I'd be weeding again, but I'd also have to be watering and also have to be fertilizing. So if weeds come up through the grasses in here, I can simply pull them and feed them back into the system and use these walkways as fertilizing channels. If there's interest, I can do a video on what I understand to be really good scything mowing technique. I've been using it for years and years. I've got so much more to learn, but it's functional and works really well for me. And it's beautiful in the morning to be able to listen to birds while doing pretty important work as far as managing landscape, keeping access open, and harvesting a ridiculous amount of fertility. And you can just see that small area yielded so much. That's about maybe a 40th of what I could harvest in here. So all of our fertility can be coming just from this landscape that would otherwise be brush hogged with a diesel mower. And you're left with a much cleaner cut. I mean, it looks super tidy when it's done. So anyway, that is my spiel on scything. Lovely tool. Let me know if you have questions and what else we could talk about with this. We'll do an update on the garlic and some of the other crops we're doing in here soon, as well as how we plan to manage this half acre of potatoes and what the transition plan will be. This will be hopefully enough potatoes to offer for donation and for volunteering in the fall. So we'll explain more as that evolves. They're just starting to perk up. There's one. There's 400 pounds of seed in here, so fingers crossed that'll work out really well.